Well, for more on that story, we are joined, to give a government perspective, we're now joined by the Minister of Communications, Mokonyane, to discuss the Marikana commemoration and more. Minister, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting us, and good afternoon to the viewers. And once more, sincere condolences to the families, the co-workers, the community of Marikana, and those that are in the different provinces of origin, villages and towns. This should be a day that would have never been in our calendar.
Now, in days leading up to the commemoration, the 16th of August, there have been various calls for government, for the president, to declare the 16th of August Marikana Day. What is your response to that as government?
What has been on the government's desk was the report that came out of the Falam Commission that was set up by President Jacob Zuma, and the report in which we are now busy doing the implementation of the recommendations from the Falam Commission. The issues of a declaration of a national holiday was not necessarily in that report. We have been hard at work dealing with those recommendations. We have trained over 2,000 members of the South African Police Services on how to deal with public order policing. We have already, through the attorneys and the trust fund that has been established for the families and the victims, already issued not less than 67 million. We now are awaiting a confirmation from the attorneys on the other considerations that government has put in terms of the reparations. And we've also gone beyond just the claims, dealing again with the IPD processes on the police management's conduct on that particular day, and ensuring that those that have been found to be on the wrong side are held to account. We have looked at what Labour has just been calling on now around beneficiation, the processes around the MPRDA bill, which is before Parliament now, that seeks to again radicalize the regulatory environment, including the entire value chain of the mining sector, as well as the mining charter that also has to deal with the issues that are related to the living conditions, the rights and responsibilities, and of importance, ensuring that the dignity and the safety of the mine worker is actually guaranteed in line with our own Labour Relations Act. And lastly, looking at the development, economic development and social development of those sending regions that many of the mine workers are coming from, the majority coming from the Eastern Cape. There's a lot of work around social interventions that have been done even in the Eastern Cape, other than just in Marikana. There's work that has been done on growing the economy and skilling young people of the Eastern Cape and some parts of Mpumalanga. In the areas of Gauteng, we do have those that are coming from Lesotho and Swaziland. And of course, we have to make sure that through the interministerial committee that government has put together around the distressed mines and towns, we also grow the economy of those areas so that then there's integrated human settlement, there's local economic opportunities, and beneficiation also happens for those particular communities, including ownership in some aspects of the mining activity that takes place within a particular area. But finally, we do want South Africa, all of us, to lend a hand in the processes that have been done on bilateral basis with different sectors, working together with the President of the country, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, to work for a period where there will be interaction between himself and the families, and even getting into Marikana, but not only Marikana, but also going to the families and communities that are affected that live outside of Marikana.
I actually also wanted to touch on that. You know, there's been a lot of angst surrounding the president's visit to Marikana for obvious reasons. Why hasn't he visited Marikana yet?
It shouldn't be a visit. As I've said, there's work that has been done. Yes, the pace has been very slow And there must also be a respect of the rituals that go with these kind of visits. There must also be an appreciation that there has been serious hostilities and pain. There must be an appreciation that not all families are located there, and the immediate people that are now interacting with government have actually been coming, assisting the traditional leaders, the trade union movements, civil society, faith-based organizations, all of them working. And once everything is being done in a foreseeable time, the president will be able, together with a collective of national government, as I've said, there's an interministerial committee, there are different organizations that are now working, labor, civil society, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, traditional leaders. There will then be that kind of, not just a public relations kind of an act, but going in not to actually find closure, but to heal the wounds and to look at each other and further say, this is a day that should have never happened. And all of us then put other concrete measures that must make sure that what is befitting must be the change of the manner in which mine workers in this country are treated and the rights of the vulnerable groups, and that moving beyond these things never happen again.
And, in addition to really touching the heartstrings of many South Africans, one thing that this tragedy has done, it's sort of opened people's eyes to the working conditions of miners, to the living conditions of people in mining towns.
Absolutely. We know what has happened with the living out allowances. We know what has been happening with the single-sex hostels. We know what has been happening with the spiraling of informal settlements. We know what has happened with the labor brokering of the recruitment of mine workers. And of importance, we know how the employer has actually taken advantage of the vulnerability and the desperation for jobs. And hence, all these issues are attended in a much more holistic and inclusive manner.
But now, also, I wanted to know how extensive is sort of the line of communication between government and Marikana families? Because, recent reports have suggested that, there are widows who are living in abject poverty. And obviously that kind of links into the question about compensation. Reports suggested that there was 100 million rand that was paid out. But, I read through, your statement, 67 million rands has been paid out. And as an extension to that question, do you know how many more families still need to be paid out?
As I have said earlier on, there is a report, the Falam Commission's report, and there are attorneys that have been the ones that were acting on behalf of the affected families. It is through those attorneys that government has been interacting with the affected families. We do realize that that may be one of the weaknesses, but we don't want to do away with it because they've also established a trust fund. So monies have been put through the trust fund to deal with these issues. But going forward, hence these bilaterals and engagements, we must find a way where there is interaction because, for example, in the Eastern Cape, the Department of Social Development, the Department of Economic Development, the Department of Rural Development is working with the various communities that those who have lost their lives and have been injured are actually being assisted. And the most important thing is access to information for government, just like the houses that government has built in Marikana, where there's now a dispute about who is qualifying to get into the house. We need that space, and these are the experiences that we're sharing with civil society, with faith-based organizations to say, we do these things. There are these middle role players. Is it possible that as part of the healing process, healing of the wounds, we must be able to reach out to the most affected, who are the widows, who are the children of those who have passed on, who are the victims, those that have been injured. And these are the things that behind the scenes have been attended to because they really create a constraint, but we're quite happy that there's been a lot of collaboration and cooperation. And once the situation is correct, for all of us to then come come out and make this nation to know what has been done, that shall actually be done.
Yeah, you talked about, the healing process, and, we often neglect how important that is, rehabilitation for the families of these victims. 6 years on, it can be quite traumatic. I mean, you've got ordinary South Africans who saw things unfold in the comfort of their own homes, but then you've got people who lived and managed to survive that tragedy. We don't often talk about how important it is for them to have mental restoration and, and psychologically as well.
I've shared this kind of an experience, and many South Africans, those who lived in the East Rand, in Ekurhuleni, in Katlehong, where people have seen lives, actually bodies lying around. That day when people were watching on television, not only are the families, but the whole nation has been traumatized, and hence we definitely have to find a healing process, but worse with the affected families. We know that there is one that is yet to be confirmed, and we need to also get assistance to locate the family of one of those who lost his life, including those policemen and the security guys. So it is quite a very intensive process. Hence, the Department of Social Development has been working with the families in the Eastern Cape, trying to deal with the post-traumatic disorders and the challenges, and helping to get the families, the affected communities, to actually begin to deal with this, even give government feedback on how best these things can be avoided. Like, for example, the issue that comes from many of the widows to say, create jobs where we live, so that then our loved ones don't have to travel and go and end up being casualties of this kind of a standoff.
Now, as government, you're not immune to criticism. If anything, you're prone to criticism. We just came out of that AMCU briefing. They didn't have the nicest things to say about you as government. But then how do you sort of lobby them? Because, for one, they're critical stakeholders as part of the whole, as part of the mining community, as well as, critical interlocutors as far as the Marikana tragedy is concerned.
We need each other, and there is no way that the South African government can absolve itself away from the criticism. We could have done better. We could have avoided the situation, but we can't also just protect industry that has failed to act in an appropriate manner. And through that, we must ensure that we do show remorse. Secondly, we act in an impartial manner. And thirdly, we appreciate the anger and the agitation that come from those who have been in the cold face of what happened, such as the leadership of the trade union movements that are organizing in those particular areas, the families that are distraught. I've just heard also through another platform some of the people who were injured, and today they are as yet to be debriefed, but also being given alternative job opportunities because of the injuries that they have sustained. And that must lie squarely in the doorstep of the employer, so that then they don't actually continue to remain destitute. The widows and the children, government has to take responsibility, and everyone and anyone who has been lending a hand on them must also become a partner, and government must humble himself, and ensure that we do find one another. And hence we have found other people who are helping government to stand up and reach out to the families in a manner that will not take us back to hostilities, but in a manner that would actually heal us out of the pain that we have all endured and the humiliation that we have found ourselves in as government.
Right, Minister, thank you very much for that. We just got breaking news that Aretha Franklin has passed away. We do know that she was sort of a voice in America for the struggle against, she was a voice for the civil rights movement, the struggle against segregation. What do you have to say to that?
Well, she used her voice to raise issues around the rights of women, the rights of African Americans, the dispossession of those that are living in the diaspora, and our hearts and prayers with the family and those that are in the creative industry. But here closer home, we've lost also a very talented young man, pro kid, Linda Mkize, who, again, we need to deal with the issues that relate to the loss of life at such a tender age. And we must make sure that his legacy must be a legacy that makes sure that the industry and those that are there are not exploited and are not actually taken for a ride to an extent where their voices are only heard once they have actually lied silent.
Minister, was a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Once more, condolences to families.
Thank you so much. That's Communications Minister Nomvula Mokonyane touching on the commemoration of the Marikana tragedy, really going deeper into some of the issues, including government's response to the massacre and several measures around it.